Richard Werner is calling for the end of the damaging negative interest rate policies. What is your comments on central bank policies? Is there a non-dramatic way out? How far are we from central banks starting buying shares?
So I saw that when Japan went negative, which was the first, the Japanese bond market had gone negative beforehand. The free market had taken it there, not the central bank. When Euribor went negative, when the ECB went negative, Euribor had been negative for 18 months. The bank, same in Sweden, same in Denmark. In the UK, it's negative. First time in 500 years. So the Bank of England will cut. I don't believe that the central banks are the key influence in the interest rate markets. So many people believe that they are driving them lower. I think it's driven by debt and demographics. And I think it's inescapable for the United States too. I think it's coming. And I think that the central banks may well even use aggressive, like the Swiss have done, aggressive negative interest rate policy to try and create velocity of money, to try and get money out of savers' hands and back into the economy. I think they're going to try it because the market will have taken them negative first.
But does it work?
No.
No.
No. Doesn't work. And not until they solve how to, I mean, the next phase is obviously monetary stimulus financing fiscal stimulus. The central bank digital currencies allows that to be one whole mechanism directly. So that if I'm the ECB, I can give you money directly because I think you need money and that person needs to have negative interest rates. They can do all of that. That's to come. But I think the next phase towards this is the MMT movement of, fine, let's just try that. For no other reason than nothing else works.
Why is the credit creation theory so it just keeps being avoided by the central banks?
In what respect?
In terms of, you know, the window guidance, the things that were actually in place in Japan before it got into the 90s troubles.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And I'm still not sure what the answers are. And I think Japan, when it was using guidance, had a banking system that functioned. We don't really have a European banking system, or the US banking system functions somewhat, but if we look at velocity of money around the world right now, it is below 1 in every single major economy outside of the US, which is 1.2. So it's basically telling us the monetary mechanism is now broken. So even window guidance to say lend to those industries, not to those, or whatever format, I don't think it works because the banks can't. The only way around it is if the central banks give the money directly, or the government does.
We have just read ECB Madame Lagarde's article on the introduction of digital euro, following a big Bundesbank virtual conference on the future of payments end of November. Have digital currencies practically become a given fact?
Yes, without question. And the last central bank to do it will be the Fed, because there is a twofold problem that they face here. One is you could get the dollarization of the world, because when you don't have banks distributing money necessarily and it comes directly from the central banks and everybody could adopt the dollar, that basically destroys everything. They don't want that. They also want to know what the other central banks are trying to do to create a competitor to the dollar. So they've got this really hard thing, because Facebook Libra let the cat out of the bag, and it was genius. What they said was, we want to create a basket of digital currencies, including the dollar, altogether. Now, if you think about it, we only think of currencies in terms of each other. The dollar against the euro against the pound. But when all the currencies are in a basket, what's the denominator? Well, it's probably money supply. Well, that's an incredibly stable monetary instrument for you and I can promise you that currency, you know, it's going to be stable for you. And if you can agree on what that money supply growth is amongst nations, okay, you've got something extremely powerful. Now, every country will lower the weight of the dollar in that basket. It will not be the 80% that it is now. Mm-hmm. It has to get closer to GDP. So it's going to be 30, 40% of that basket. Mm-hmm. That's a massive devaluation of the dollar. So the US is, and a lessening of the dollar's influence, because world trade, it's not just a move in the price, but you're not pricing world trade in dollars. You're pricing in 75% or 65% other stuff. So super interesting, but it is coming definitely without question and faster than we think.
Mm-hmm. What consequences do you expect?
Who the hell knows? I mean, they already, if you listen to Benoit Cœuré from the ECB and now the BIS, he's telling us that central banks are making the decision, do we just have a simple stable coin? Or do we have smart contracts? Do we have programmable money that he can give you and me different rates of interest or stimulate in different ways? Can they give us students loans, one interest rate? Okay, that's a wholesale change to economics. That's the rise of behavioral economics and a moving away from monetary economics and Keynesianism. Well, it's kind of Keynesian meets behavioral economics, because then you can create incentive systems. So these things are massive. The other question is, does Europe even think it will have a banking system? Because I would imagine the ECB is thinking, well, you know what? Why don't we just nationalize all these things, go to a central bank digital currency and use the nationalized banks as our warehouse that distributes the money. So we don't have to deal with all the public, but we create these and let the fintech layer create the digital solutions. I think that's what's coming here. I think most of these banks will end up being nationalized, and I think the ECB know it.
By the way, why doesn't ECB governor like the stable coins?
Because they are a direct competition to central banks. Because you're creating currency, but it doesn't get touched by the central banks or the banking system. So the Eurodollar market was the traditional way of doing that. So if you in Slovenia wants to borrow dollars, there's the Eurodollar market, and you'll go to your bank, they'll do an FX transact, and it basically becomes Europeans or Japanese banks or whoever could create dollars out of thin air. And now they're creating dollars not in the banking system. And that's terrifying, because then there is no control over your fiat currency, what it's used for and how it's used. And central banks can't do that because governments need regulation and taxation. Now, we may not want that, but they want it.
Yeah. The whole idea seems to me like merging monetary and fiscal policies.
Totally agree.
Do you see any legitimacy issues with that? Because ECB, of course, is a bunch of non-elected people running the whole thing. I don't see European countries coming to the same platform.
Find me another answer. That's the problem. I ask this, I turn it round and say, okay, fine. What's the other answer? And I haven't got one, and most people don't either. So they go this way, and it doesn't go right. We know, because you still have to increase debt. We're not stopping any of the issues. We're still devaluing fiat currency, but what you've created, and you're using, and you may be able to help people get out of this crisis, and it might work for a time. But then the same problem still surfaces. You've now got you've now got rid of the problems of the banking system, but the problems at government level and central bank level. So that is what Bitcoin is all about. It's the life raft. It's the way that you and I can say, you know what, we're not comfortable with this anymore. I don't want to hold euros or dollars or pounds. I'm just going to hold Bitcoin, and we can just step out. And because I don't know how it all ends, whether we have to have a giant debt jubilee, start all over again, create something different, but something will happen in the end. And I don't think that end is too far away. So it's nice to have something like Bitcoin. You know, I was postulating over the weekend about the idea that what happens if they created this central bank digital currency, but the basket version?
Yeah.
And what happens to be a member of that basket? You're restricted to 2%. You're allowed the 50% increase in money printing to get out of the crisis. And then the only way you're going to do it is to agree to a 2% increase in money supply only. So then you've got a central bank digital currency that looks like Bitcoin once it's been devalued. Okay, that's interesting. Now, can you then, you will have inflated your way out of the debts because you've devalued by 50% essentially. Those kind of things, they're possible. And then maybe you wrap all these debts up and issue a perpetual bond at 0% interest rates. So there is ways out, and it's not going to be a hyperinflation, everybody, you know, having to eat grass in a field because there's no food to live on. It's not going to work that way. There are other ways to answer this, but they're going to take a crisis for people to do it.